Latimore was more than the deep, unmistakable voice behind "Let's Straighten It Out." For decades, Benjamin William Latimore, known professionally simply as Latimore, occupied a distinctive place where blues, soul, rhythm and blues, gospel, and Southern soul met. His music often sounded intensely personal, yet much of the man behind that voice remained remarkably private. Even after decades in the business, some of the most interesting details of his career were easier to discover in old recordings, session credits, interviews, and the history of Miami's music scene than in celebrity headlines. His career ultimately stretched across more than 6 decades, from his earliest work as a pianist to his recognition as a Blues Hall of Fame artist. Latimore was born September 7, 1939, in Charleston, Tennessee, to musically inclined parents. Music entered his life unusually early through the family piano, while the sounds surrounding him came from several directions. He listened to blues, country, and gospel broadcasts on Nashville radio, and at 13 he sang his first solo in his Baptist church. That mixture became important to his later identity. Although audiences often associated him with Southern soul and blues, his musical foundation was never limited to one genre. After high school, Latimore attended Tennessee State University, but he did not remain there long. Music proved more compelling than completing his studies, and he moved toward professional performance. During the early 1960s, he worked with musicians including Louis Brooks and Joe Henderson, eventually relocating to Miami after leaving Henderson's band. That move was crucial. Miami was developing into an important recording center, and Latimore found himself surrounded by producers, musicians, and independent labels that would shape the direction of his career. One lesser-known part of Latimore's story is that he was already working as a pianist before becoming widely recognized as a singer. His keyboard ability gave him opportunities beyond his own records. He eventually became associated with the Miami recording operation surrounding Henry Stone and TK Records, and sources documenting his career note that he served as a house pianist. In other words, the musician audiences eventually knew for his voice had already established himself behind the scenes at the piano. His first recordings came during the mid-1960s for Henry Stone's Dade label. At that stage, he was sometimes billed as Benny Latimore. Later, when he moved to Stone's Glades label, the professional name was shortened to Latimore. That apparently simple change became part of the identity that would remain with him for the rest of his career. The breakthrough arrived in 1973 with his interpretation of T-Bone Walker's Stormy Monday. Produced by Steve Alaimo, the record reached number 27 on Billboard's R&B chart and introduced a much larger audience to Latimore's distinctive combination of blues phrasing, soul emotion, and piano-driven musicianship. His first album, Latimore, was also released in 1973. Then came the recording that permanently changed his career, Let's Straighten It Out. Written by Latimore himself, the song became a #1 R&B hit in 1974 and also reached number 31 on the Billboard Hot 100. What makes the record particularly interesting is its unusual construction. Rather than relying solely on a conventional sung performance, Latimore incorporated an extended spoken introduction before the song fully settles into its soul blues groove. The effect made the record sound less like a standard single and more like a private conversation placed inside a recording studio. That approach reflected something important about Latimore's songwriting. His songs frequently dealt with relationships, disagreements, desire, regret, and the emotional complications between men and women. He later explained that some of his material came from personal experience, while other stories were drawn from experiences people shared with him during his years in the music business. That helps explain why many of his songs sound conversational rather than purely theatrical. The success did not stop with one record. Keep the Home Fire Burnin' reached number 5 on the R&B chart in 1975, while Something 'Bout Cha reached number 7 in 1976. Latimore had established himself as one of the recognizable voices of the Southern soul movement, although his chart momentum weakened toward the end of the decade. There was also a fascinating creative side to his later work. During his Malacco period, Latimore sometimes wrote under the pseudonym Leonard Gibson. Malacco's official biography notes that 6 of the 10 songs on his 1985 album Good Time Man were written or co-written by Gibson, a name identified as one of Latimore's pseudonyms. That detail is easy to overlook because listeners encountering the credits would not necessarily realize they were seeing another name for the same artist. In 1982, Latimore joined Morocco Records, a label that became strongly associated with Southern soul and modern blues. His first Morocco album was Singing in the Key of Love. He remained connected with the company through multiple releases and eventually returned to the label after a period away. His Morocco recordings included collaborations with respected studio musicians and producers, including the Muscle Shoals Horns, Carson Whitsett, Tommy Couch, Wolf Stevenson, and others. His relationship with the music business also extended beyond his own albums. Latimore continued functioning as a session pianist, contributing his musicianship to recordings by other artists. He appeared on Joss Stone's The Soul Sessions and Mind, Body, and Soul, alongside Miami music veterans including Betty Wright, Timmy Thomas, and Willie Hale. His appearance on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon in May 2014, where he sat in with the Roots, demonstrated that his reputation remained strong well beyond the era of his biggest chart singles. His private life, however, is much less thoroughly documented than his musical career. That is significant because Latimore spent much of his professional life singing about relationships while revealing relatively little about his own romantic affairs in mainstream biographies. Reliable sources do document that family, faith, and personal experience influenced his outlook, but widely circulated internet claims about specific spouses, partners, children, or family relationships are not sufficiently supported by authoritative biographical sources to present them as fact. For a factual account, it is better to distinguish what is documented from what has simply been repeated online. The same caution applies to current rumors. As of August 2026, there are numerous social media posts and informal pages discussing Latimore's personal history, but claims about secret relationships, hidden family circumstances, or dramatic private events should not automatically be treated as established facts. No reliable evidence located for this account supports those circulating claims. What can be firmly established is that Latimore's music frequently drew on real relationship experiences and observations, while he generally kept his personal affairs away from the spotlight. The most significant recent development is no longer a rumor. Latimore died on August 22, 2026, at the age of 86, according to reports published immediately after his death by Soul Tracks and music historian Barry Scott's Lost 45s. His death came just weeks before what would have been his 87th birthday on September 7th. That timing has brought renewed attention to the recordings that defined his career. The news also explains why some current online pages may still contain outdated descriptions portraying him as an active performer. Older biographies and artist pages had continued to describe him as an active recording and live artist, but those descriptions predate the August 22, 2026 reports of his death. Latimore's legacy is particularly interesting because his biggest achievement was not simply having a hit record. He helped preserve a musical language built around emotional storytelling. His baritone could sound tender, wounded, confrontational, or reflective without losing its identity. His piano playing gave his performances an additional layer, while his willingness to address complicated relationships gave songs such as Let's Straighten It Out an intimacy that helped them survive far beyond their original chart runs. In 2017, Latimore received one of the clearest acknowledgments of that contribution when he was inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame. By then, the artist who had once worked behind the scenes as a Miami pianist had become an established figure in blues and Southern soul history. What makes Latimore's story especially compelling is the contrast between the emotional openness of his music and the relative privacy of his life. He could sing directly about romantic tension, disappointment, loyalty, and reconciliation, yet he rarely turned his own private world into a public spectacle. That separation allowed the songs to speak for themselves. From a child playing his family's piano in Tennessee, to a church singer, college student who chose music, Miami session pianist, Dade and Glades recording artist, chart-topping Southern soul performer, Morocco veteran, songwriter, collaborator, and Blues Hall of Fame inductee, Latimore's journey followed a remarkably long musical road. His death in August 2026 closed that journey, but the recordings remain evidence of a musician who understood something essential about soul music. Sometimes the most powerful performance is the one that sounds like someone finally telling the truth.